Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
Welcome into episode 8 of the Four Tire Change podcast. Dawson Iserlo back with you here on ESPN Southwest Louisiana. And we are joined once again by Chris Fusaro, who joined us preseason. And can you believe it? Already a month down in the NASCAR Cup Series season here. We're starting to see some trends. We're starting to see some cream rising to the top, I think. And we also saw a couple of really good races, couple of okay races. And we're going to talk about all that. So first of all, Chris, it has been a while. Our preseason predictions, they're not all the way in the toilet yet, but a few of them are, like me saying Austin Dillon was going to make the playoffs. That's aging like milk.
Or me totally writing off Daniel Suarez and indicating the Trackhouse will replace him next year.
Only took him a couple of weeks. So there you go. We have a couple of losses, couple of wins. We'll have to get to some of those, and we will more revisit those predictions further down the line when we can start to see some clarity there. But I want to go back here because we haven't spoken since before the 500. So, I thought it was a good time to kind of check in. It's about a month worth of racing here, and we have, 4 results to look at. We go back to the 500. What were your big takeaways there? And we can kind of group, if you want to go to Daytona first, Atlanta as well, because we saw a similar style of racing the next week.
Yeah, it was a good 500, not my favorite 500 ever. I think I just love the aura of the event so much that it could be a really poor 500, and I would probably still say it was an okay race overall. I thought the racing was fine. I thought it was a little complacent at points. I think we saw a lot of drivers call out the whole sort of slowing lines down on purpose in the front thing and really not letting the cars work. So to each their own there. I thought it was fine. I thought the action points at the end of stages were really good. I thought it was clean racing for most of the race, which was good. And I think I could give up some of the action per se and some of those slower lines for a cleaner race. So I thought that was really good. It's a lot of clean passing too, which we haven't seen at Daytona in a while, especially the summer race last year was really sort of ugly in terms of incidents. We saw the Ryan Preece incident there last summer. So I thought people were a little conservative, but it ramped up at the right times.
And then, along those lines, of course, William Byron gets the win. It's massive for Hendrick, and they kind of get going on the right foot here, which we're going to revisit when we get to Las Vegas. But Atlanta, and we've talked in the past about the reconfiguration, turning it into a modified super speedway, or now I guess the term that we're using is drafting track. And this was, I think a little bit of skepticism going in. Like, is Atlanta going to be what it was? There's always concern. And we were told, like, look, when this track wears out, it's not going to run the way it did the first year of the repave and the reconfiguration. But yet this might have been the best Atlanta race ever. I mean, and definitely was one of the best finishes in the history of the sport, with Daniel Suarez getting the win. I know Atlanta's your home track, so you've seen the evolution of Atlanta probably closer than a lot of people. I mean, what was it like to see that race play out the way it did?
It made me wish I was there. It was unbelievable. I think Atlanta really sort of paid its dues in a way and had some really mediocre racing for a decade. And that repave couldn't have come at a better time. I feel like the racing surface was quite literally crumbling before everybody's eyes in the summer 2021. So I think it's one of those things of the banking and the angles of the track that they created to give us this sort of super speedway racing on a half-mile track. That's not going to go away. So I'm sort of the myth that Atlanta will stay the same. Obviously, the racing surface will age. We've seen repaves where the racing has changed tracks and has kept tracks the same as it aged. I think we're going to see a lot of the same racing out of Atlanta in the future. Maybe some of the further back in the pack guys will drift back, but the front pack will, I think, at least always be 15 cars or so, which we've seen. But I think it's a really smooth racetrack. I think we combined with the banking and the stuff that they've done, like I said, it allows for a lot of smooth racing, a lot of clean passes, a lot of really unbelievable moves by a lot of drivers in that race. So I think if people say, it was a really good finish, it's one of the best finishes ever, yes, but it was one of the best races overall ever that I've watched start to finish. It made NASCAR look genius.
What's interesting too is that they NASCAR made a decision about the beginning two races here to put Atlanta right behind Daytona this year. And I was fairly skeptical of that. I thought, okay, we're going to throw a lot of this at the beginning. But one of the aspects of it that I think worked out a lot is you had a 500 that got enough people buzzing about it to go, okay, if the casual fan tunes in next week, now they see a race that looks a lot like Daytona. And this, in this instance, it ended up being even more exciting racing than Daytona. But I do like that aspect that it kept the viewer engaged. And if you had a casual fan who tuned in for the 500 and went, oh, that was kind of cool. They didn't watch, Las Vegas the next week and go, that wasn't anything like what I saw. They maybe got hooked in. Those same lines, though, and we already alluded to Suarez, and how massive that is. We'll have plenty of time to get into that when we talk about the playoff standings. If they did tune in the following week after Atlanta, then they probably went, what is that compared to what I saw before? And I wouldn't say it was a bad race. I thought Las Vegas was fine. But it is interesting how NASCAR is always doing this thing. If you watch an NFL game and you watch the Chiefs play the Lions on Thursday night to open up the season, and you go, wow, and you're a casual fan, you haven't watched a lot of football, and you go, that was awesome. Let me watch Sunday. Now, outside of maybe watching the Pittsburgh Steelers try to play offense, maybe that would be a little different. But the point is you would see a similar product, right? And NASCAR has that problem where they have different styles of racing that don't even hardly resemble each other. So going into Las Vegas and having all that being said, I don't know if it was great for the casual viewer, but it was a race that displayed the fastest car winning, which I think in some ways NASCAR needs some of that. What were your thoughts on the way the Vegas race played out?
Well, I think two things. One, it was an okay race. Second thing, I think you could have put the 10th best race of the season following Atlanta, and most people wouldn't have been pleased. I think it was kind of sandwiched at a bad time. It was a mile and a half track that, delivered a lot of really good races last year too. So I think people are sort of stuck on that. People like the Kansas. That was one of the better races of last year. So we'll have a very high expectation of mile and a half tracks. Vegas kind of is what it is. It lives somewhere between Charlotte and Texas in my mind. It's just sort of, fine. So it was fine. There was nothing special about it, but following Atlanta definitely didn't do itself any favors.
And Kyle Larson gets the win, who was my pick to really, be one of the real contenders this season. I don't think that's going out on a limb, obviously. But Hendrick showed their speed. And there was also the factor of the cars with the new body styles, the Fords and the Toyotas, and how would they be in speed in relation to the Chevys. And I think for the most part, the first test was, okay, the Chevys are back where they've been. Like, they're really good at these mile and a half racetracks. And so I was interested to see that. And for me, that's kind of how it played out. But then you go to Phoenix, and while it's certainly not the same style, and we got to look at this short track package, that wasn't exactly the case anymore. And we saw the Hendrick cars really struggle at times during the Phoenix race. A lot's going to be made about the short track package. I think everyone's going to try and make judgments about whether they got this right or wrong after one race. And I think that's kind of unfair. To be honest, I think there's arguments to be said that Phoenix already has been like this for a long time through other packages as well. Like it just hasn't been conducive. And it's why, this isn't the time for that conversation, but I hope and pray that they will be moving away from Phoenix for the championship race, at least on a rotating basis, which I've heard from some people in the industry. There's some momentum moving towards that, which would be pretty sweet. But all that being said, I'm not ready to, claim victory or failure on this package after the Phoenix race, but I know it wasn't probably the first great start into trying to get better, more, solid racing at those types of tracks.
Yes, but I think a lot of NASCAR and the short track package is judged on two tracks, Bristol and Martinsville. And unfortunately, Phoenix just has to be the championship race, but I don't think that gauges a lot. I think sort of spoke on that. NASCAR wants Bristol to be exciting again. It wants Martinsville to be exciting again. They haven't been that exciting in a while. They tried the Bristol dirt thing. It didn't work out. We're back to the concrete surface this weekend. So it's not necessarily a Hail Mary by NASCAR yet. We're not quite at that point, but we're on, we're third and long, and they're trying to do everything possible. But can they do something successful for short tracks without giving up this really good mile and a half package that we've seen with the next gen car?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about it is we've heard that kind of Bristol's going to be on its own thing. It's not going to necessarily even be the short track package, which I think is interesting. And I guess we'll see. Now, Bristol, again, it's kind of its own deal with the way the banking is, and you don't have that at Martinsville. I think Martinsville will be the biggest test of it, and we already talked about that a little bit. The racing at Martinsville has got to get better, and I think it's a track that's beloved for a lot of reasons, and we've gotten away from that. If it wasn't for a Hail Melon that turned, what was otherwise a pretty underwhelming race into a fantastically entertaining event at the end there, I think we'd be having even more dire conversations about it. But I will be interested to see what Bristol looks like, which again, I need to get some more clarification on, but it sounds like they're not even using the same package that they used at Phoenix at Bristol. And then of course, what Martinsville looks like as well. Now, we didn't talk about it when we mentioned the race just now, so we'll go to it now. The winner of it is Christopher Bell, and Bell's a guy, I have him in my championship 4 this year. He's made 2 straight appearances. He's gotten a knack for winning when he needs to, but now he wins when he doesn't need to, and it's early in the season. For you, is this maybe just, okay, Toyota got it right at Phoenix and that's great? Or do you think this is the beginning of an emergence for Christopher Bell for the rest of the year?
I think it says more about Christopher Bell than Toyota. I think we've seen sort of this trend from him 2021 to now, to where he's, he still flies under the radar for some reason. Maybe he's a quiet, laid back guy, doesn't really command a lot of attention in the garage. That 20 car is fast, and he's really, really, really good. So I think it says more about him. Toyota was not very strong through the first 3 races. Let's say more about them. This weekend going into Bristol, I don't know. We'll see. But I think Christopher Bell is obviously a championship contender. He will be for the foreseeable future as long as he's in that ride.
Let's take a look at the standings. We've now gone through the 4 races that have happened. This has been, an interesting year. We've had some penalties given out for Stewart-Haas Racing, who feel like they can't seem to catch a break. Worth noting, Noah Gregson's had some really good finishes, and we both were, pretty doubtful of Noah Gregson's abilities to pull this thing together. And so far, I think he's a big bright spot. But even with all the work he's done, he's buried in the standings because Stewart-Haas can't get out of their own way, and they gave him a 35-point penalty, so he's in 26th. But I want you to take a look at it and tell me, because I've got an opinion on this as well. The guy that's in the top 16 right now, and of course you'll have to include winners there, but fortunately all 4 winners are in the top 10 anyway. The guy in the top 16 right now that you're most confident does not make the playoffs.
I mean, this is very interesting coming out of my mouth, but I think it's Kyle Busch.
Wow. Okay.
Looking at the standings, I was sort of very shocked to see him at 11th because I feel like his year has been miserable thus far. I feel like nothing has gone right. He ran well at Daytona, sort of faded to the back in the last few laps of the 500. It just hasn't clicked. I don't know if it's the RCR trickle-down effect, if he really sort of defied odds last year with the year he had given, the past decade or so of RCR. Post Kevin Harvick, I really don't know. I think Alex Bowman will make the playoffs. I did not originally have him in. Bubba Wallace has ran really strong thus far. Austin Cindric, I've seen a lot of good improvement out of him, which is a big jump in my opinion, considering he's only won 1 career race in the Daytona 500. And Chris Buescher, who I really like. And I think RFK is much improved from where they were 2 years ago when Brad Keselowski joined on as a co-owner and driver in the number 6 car. So Kyle Busch was it's crazy to think about given who Kyle Busch is and what he is in the sport. But I think he's going to be fighting. I really do.
And I like it because, look, if you're going based on where the speed is, like Busch had some good runs at the drafting track, so to speak. But look at how awful Austin Dillon's been. Now, some of that's been, accidents. It hasn't all been speed, but they haven't been lightning quick either. I think the easiest answer would be Bubba, but I'm actually not going to go there. I think 2311 to me has shown some things, and I've seen some things I like. Now, obviously, Reddick's always really good at the intermediates anyway, but the fact that they have speed in those racetracks, I think Bubba gets enough good finishes here and obviously has a chance to run himself into a win at one point or another. I will go Austin Cindric. And, I went between him and Buescher was actually my 2 that I kind of got down to at the end. I don't know why I'm still doubting Buescher. He continues to have pretty good runs here. And, maybe that'll be something I come around on later. I actually think Keselowski's more likely to make it, even though right now you have, a 9-spot difference between the 2. But for me, Cindric, it has been nice to see. And look, he's not in a prove it year, but I think he's getting to the point where those officials now look, we know he's got connections in Penske that are going to make it a little bit more difficult to move on from him than the average driver. But I think they're probably, looking for something here soon from him. And I doubt that a little bit. And look, Penske's also had a really weird year. Joey Logano, who we're going to talk about in a minute, is nowhere near the playoffs right now. Ryan Blaney has been really good and has kind of backed up his title run. And obviously he's a few inches away from having a win in Atlanta already as well. I think Austin Cindric's going to struggle, and you're going to have Logano battling to make up this big deficit. And I always kind of think it's interesting about the shared equipment, shared notes, and things like that. I don't know. We'll see. But I would go with Austin Cindric. I mentioned Logano there. Let's talk about it right now. This is crazy to think that Joey Logano is currently behind these drivers in the point standings. Justin Haley, Todd Gilliland, Harrison Burton, Noah Gragson with that penalty calculated in, Daniel Hemrick, Carson Hocevar, and Corey LaJoie, just to name a few. Disastrous start to the year for the 22 team. And a guy who's obviously a defending, or not the defending, but a previous champion in this sport multiple times. His teammate is the defending champion, and his teammate's running really, really well. And both of his teammates are running really, really well. I know there's some bad luck in there as well. But as of right now, I'll ask it this way. If he doesn't win a race, if he has a Chase Elliott type year where he doesn't win a race, I'm not saying he'll get hurt and break his leg for 4 weeks. But can Joey Logano or will Joey Logano make it on points in your opinion?
Oof. It's tough. I mean, you sort of alluded to it. The two, super speedway tracks, bad luck. I would say yes, but it's not a surefire yes. I would say yes based on precedent and who he's been in the sport for a very long time now. But based off what we've seen through 4 races, it couldn't have gone worse thus far. But you have to think that they'll turn around. You have to think that he'll win multiple races. But if he doesn't, if this trend just continues on and it turns out to be more than just bad luck, it's a lot to make up. He's behind a lot of drivers who maybe are trending in a better direction than we thought. So we'll see. There could be a penalty factored in there. There's so much that happens when you have to get in on just points. So you really have to have a clean year overall if you're not going to win a race.
The interesting thing too, and look, I would have to go back and look at our exact playoff selections, but the majority of the top 16 is guys that we were pretty much expecting to be in the top 16. Daniel Suarez is a big exception. We were kind of both, I had him right on the outside in, but I did not have him in. And he is not only has he won a race and locked himself in, but he's in 7th. And Ty Gibbs was a guy who we had in, but on the fringe. That's pretty much the guys that we talked about. Logano's the big exception, and Keselowski's another one who's in 22nd. But who is the guy that's outside of the top 16? And let's exclude Logano for the purpose of arguments here, that you see most likely either A, winning a race, or B, getting in on points.
I mean, I feel like the obvious answer is Brad Keselowski. I think his prowess on super speedways over the years, you essentially have 6 tries now, with Atlanta and the configuration that it is. So I would say Brad Keselowski, but call me crazy. I think Corey LaJoie really could win a race this year. I really do. I've been so impressed by Spire, even more impressed by Carson Hocevar, given what that 77 ride has been the past few years. I think Spire's trending in a really good direction. May have something to do with acquiring the truck program from Kyle Busch. I don't know, just having more assets, more bodies in that building. Maybe it does something for their Cup drivers, their Cup program overall. I think Corey LaJoie could get it done. Michael McDowell is barely outside the top 16 right now. I have nothing to say, but the guy just defies odds. He's unbelievable. The career path that he's taken, this sort of crazy long journey to the top of the sport, almost, and winning the Daytona 500, obviously. So him, Todd Gilliland, very well could win a race. Other than those guys, Spire, Joey Logano, obviously we mentioned. I don't see an Austin Dillon. I don't really see a Stuart Haas. Ryan Preece is in a huge hole too. Noah Gragson you touched on a little bit. Unbelievable start thus far. I've been very impressed. We'll see if it sustains itself. Like you said, they can't really get out of their own way, but he would be inside the top 20 if it wasn't for their penalty. So.
Yeah, and Ryan Preece, for the record, he does have the penalty there, but he is behind Kaz Gralla and Zane Smith as well in overall points. That's not exactly where you want to be. If I had to pick one guy, by the way, to make it on points without a win right now, I'm actually going to go Eric Jones. I think Legacy has shown me a lot more than I expected. The move over, switching manufacturers over to Toyota, we didn't exactly know. I think some thought that might put them behind a little bit, but it hasn't. And John Hunter's been really solid in the 42 car. Again, that's a car that had really 2 bad years the last 2 years, or since its inception, I guess. And they've gotten some things. He's sitting 21st. The other interesting thing about the point standings, look, it's pretty early to do points. We're just doing this for the sake of conversation. But there's only a 6-point gap between 21st and 16th. So that's pretty interesting to me, or at least 21st and 17th. So a lot of cars and a lot of drivers, I should say, still in the mix here 4 weeks into the season. All right, we're wrapping things up here, Chris. Let's go just with a little bit of a Bristol preview. Already kind of talked about what the configuration is going to look like. I don't know, but I think we should be good. It's back on the concrete, no more dirt. Sunday, give me a race winner and give me what you're looking for.
Looking for just 500 solid laps. I think if we could see a progress made from, I guess, really the last Bristol night race. But I think seeing the Bristol concrete surface in the daylight, and maybe a little heat, some sunlight on it, maybe that changes things based off of what we've seen a few night races. It's been what feels like forever since we've been on the concrete surface in the sun and during the day, not at night. So I think, teams may take a while to settle in. I'm going to go Ty Gibbs as a race winner.
Wow. Okay.
Kind of off the beat path, but he's run very well thus far. Very impressed. I think that team's made a big leap forward. So Ty Gibbs winning at Bristol.
I like it. I thought Gibbs right away as well. And maybe that's a little recency bias there on seeing them. Yeah. I'm actually going to predict a back-to-back here. Give me Christopher Bell to win another one. And I just think it feels to me like this is his coming out party. As you mentioned, you kind of suspect the same thing. I think right now, look, again, Bristol obviously runs different than Phoenix, but I think they have enough confidence in what they're doing right now. I think Hendrick's kind of searching a little bit. I think that gives them an opportunity. Give me Gibbs Racing as a team, but not Ty Gibbs, the driver. Give me Christopher Bell instead. And we'll see. My 2 picks, I only made picks for the last 2 races. Got one right with Kyle Larson, then couldn't have been more wrong with Joey Logano last week. So we're going to see if we can get back on the right track there. But this should be a fun one, Chris. Appreciate you joining me as always, and we will catch up with you certainly again. We might kind of do it like this, monthly check-ins, kind of reset the standings, take a look at the last few races, and then, of course, I will be solo the other weeks or having some other guests mixed in as well. But appreciate you doing this as always, Chris.
Absolutely, Dawson. Appreciate it.
That'll do it for this episode of 4 Tire Change. We will be back next week, of course. But until then, please like, comment, subscribe, keep this thing rolling. Should be a fun one at Bristol. Stay tuned.